Hello and welcome everybody. Thank you very much indeed for joining this webinar. We are all living through extremely taxing and strange times as the pandemic of COVID-19 impacts all of us. It's interesting to note, I saw today that the lockdown in Wuhan has just been lifted, but we here in Europe are suffering we're experiencing very serious lockdown. In the US, it's the same. But in Africa, it's just really beginning. So where we have a lot of our operations, this is at the beginning, perhaps, of what could be a very, very catastrophic event. And so we, Fleet Forum, are taking the opportunity to provide information to our members as to what they can do to try to ensure that the drivers are as protected, drivers and passengers of our vehicles are protected as much as possible, bearing in mind that drivers are really at the very forefront. They are very often the staff members that are most exposed to risk during day-to-day operations. So in this webinar that would last about half an hour, 15 minutes of which will be presentation, 15 minutes of time for questions, and the question mode has just been enabled. So if you use the chat facility at the bottom left of your screen, you can pose your questions. So as I say, we at Fleet Forum, we are very keen to provide as much information as possible. There are a lot of questions, there's lots of uncertainty, there's lots of rumors, there's lots of opinion circulating about how we should conduct our business during these very difficult times. We at Fleet Forum are gathering as much information as we possibly can and trying to make this available to you to enable you to, in this case, protect your drivers, passengers and vehicles during this crisis. Health, safety of drivers and passengers is paramount. So during this session, we're really going to talk about really some key messages, some really key vital points that we feel that if these are followed, this will mitigate the risk faced by our drivers and so on. And I suppose the very first thing is only permit essential journeys. The first thing to do to limit the risk exposure is don't travel. Now, we can't curtail all of our operations. Some journeys are essential, but be super critical. Determine what really are critical, essential journeys, and only those should be permitted. The number of passengers or those traveling in the vehicle should really be kept to an absolute minimum. The fewer people are traveling, the lower the risk exposure. And we also need to make sure that one of the key messages of the Fleet Forum, road safety. The issues around road safety are exacerbated by the problems associated with the pandemic. Treatment is beginning to become more difficult as there's competition for hospital and medical facilities, and the possibility of transmission between people in your vehicle and any potential victims or injured parties. Therefore, the road safety message must really be emphasized at this point. So what we're going to look at here, we've mentioned three things. We've talked about drivers, we've talked about vehicles, we're going to talk about trips. We'll look at those each in turn. Support your drivers. Drivers are, as I said before, really at the forefront of risk. They need to be supported. They need to understand what's going on. They need to be reassured that you as an organization understand their position and are doing your best to minimize the risk that drivers face. So support them. I think it's useful to provide a daily update and really to the drivers and check each driver is really fit for work. Encourage drivers to report if they are exhibiting any symptoms associated with coronavirus, and if they are stay at home, don't come to work. The drivers must be briefed and prepared. And when I say briefed, they need to be made aware of this entire situation. They need to be very acutely aware of their role and the specific activities and actions that are expected of them to minimize risk, minimize any risk to them. For example, drivers in their rooms, their driver's room or rest areas, between their activities, they should be given facilities where they can practice social distancing, where there's not cross-contamination or infection between the drivers. Probably best to call drivers in by phone rather than having standing around sort of on the premises waiting to be tasked. The drivers and the vehicle must be fully equipped with the appropriate personal protection equipment. What do we mean by that? Well, there's been lots of discussion about what is appropriate personal protection equipment. Is it an entire spacesuit which prevents any infection at all with boots and gloves and full head covering, or is it a mask and gloves perhaps? I mean, each situation must be driven by the way the virus is the extent of the virus in any given context, but also what is available. We don't all have the best equipment available at all times, but they must be given something that's appropriate and the best that is available, as well as the training and the understanding of how to use that equipment. And that minimum equipment should certainly include face mask of the right type. It should include gloves. It should include hand sanitation equipment and the ability to be able to wash and prepare themselves. And we will talk about the specific questions, and I can see that some questions are appearing in the chat box. So if you have questions, I would ask that you enter your questions into the chat box, and then we will deal with them as we progress through the session. And of course, we need to make sure that the drivers are really fully aware of this road safety question, as I just mentioned to you before. Increased risk awareness, increased care must be taken when driving the vehicle because of that difficulty associated with obtaining medical attention, but also infection with perhaps people involved in any crash or other incident. And then we need to consider the vehicles. Whenever possible, some organizations do this and some don't, but I think it makes sound advice not to switch vehicles between drivers. Wherever possible, particularly in these very strained times, that wherever possible, keep the rule of one vehicle and one driver. This is to prevent, driver coming back, somebody else jumping in his vehicle, because we do know, the science tells us that this virus can live for prolonged periods of times on hard surfaces, plastic surfaces, such as handles, gear sticks, steering wheels, and so on. And just every step we can take to minimize the possibility of infection should be taken. Therefore, keeping one driver, one vehicle would be sensible. There should be we should implement a daily routine of disinfecting or sanitizing the vehicles. Now, how do we do this? Well, I mentioned these hard surfaces that we come into contact with while driving or being a passenger in the vehicle. And our vehicles are pretty robust, most of the ones that we use. And I think that there are a number of different proprietary products with which one can disinfect a vehicle, but there's also some other products such as a diluted solution of bleach which can be used to clean the vehicle. And when necessary, perhaps we are talking about disinfecting the vehicle at the beginning of the working day, but probably between trips it should be it should be disinfected. I mean, when I say between trips, is that if a driver has taken one passenger to a particular location and then drops them off, and then is coming back and picking up another passenger, it probably would make sense to have the vehicle disinfected between each of those trips. To make this really feasible and realistic, ensure the vehicles are equipped correctly. So that means having hand sanitizer for the driver. It means having cleaning wipes, this diluted bleach solution I just mentioned, a water supply with soap and paper towels, so that drivers can really thoroughly wash their hands whenever they're getting out of the vehicle or back into the vehicle. Just this because we are constantly reminded that repetitive washing is good to minimize transference, because our hands are where we touch everything, pick things up, and we can transfer them. So it's really key that whenever there's a change of personnel within a vehicle, so perhaps between trips, the vehicle should be disinfected. And indeed, this kit, the disinfection kit, should be placed in every single vehicle, and it should be part of the daily vehicle check to make sure that the equipment is there, it's complete, and so on. So then we've talked about the drivers, we've talked about vehicles, but we need also to talk about trips. As we said right at the outset of this session, trips should be strictly limited to critical activities. Only mission critical journeys should be allowed. We're at every step trying to limit any opportunity of transmission of virus. Therefore, if the vehicle is not going to a location, the possibility of transmission is limited. Therefore, strictly limit all journeys. In addition, trips must be planned, booked, and scheduled to allow time to clean vehicle between trips. We're all so used to, I have an urgent meeting, can you make a car available? I need to go to the office, I need to go to the bank, I need to go to the ministry, I have an urgent meeting. Trips, ad hoc trips, should not be allowed at all. There needs to be a discipline to ensure that between trips, a vehicle can be properly prepared for the next journey. And then we come to passengers, and this is very tricky. The number of the passengers should be minimized in each journey. Obviously, one of the things we're asked to do is to perform social distancing. If there's a passenger and a driver in a small sedan, the opportunity for social distancing is extremely limited. But I think that passengers should strictly be, the number of passengers should strictly be limited to absolutely essential. And wherever possible, just one passenger, and if possible, for the journey to be done in a bigger vehicle. One of our previous sessions recommended that actually using a minibus as the means of transport would be good, with the passenger in the back of the vehicle or the driver of the front, to maximize the space between the driver and the passenger. And we've all spoken to other organizations who do have staff that they need to move, and so they've actually decided to contract additional number of vehicles so as to spread the staff that need to be moved over a greater number of vehicles, therefore minimizing that possibility of transmission. I can see that we've got quite a few questions popping up within the chat room. So we've now got questions. We've been enabled there. Okay. So Shital, I want to know what measures should be placed for long-distance truck drivers. Well, actually, in a way, long-distance truck drivers, they're very specific, but they spend long periods of isolation in their vehicles. But of course, they have to get out, they have to get food, they have to be when they arrive for delivery or loading, they come into contact. I think they have to take the same precautions as every other driver. I mean, when they're in their cab, they keep their cab clean, and when they're at the destination or they're at a point where they're coming into contact with third parties, they should have the mask, gloves if possible, and when they're re-entering their vehicle, should wash thoroughly before re-entering the vehicle. So I don't honestly think that there's any specific requirements for a long distance truck driver, but with all drivers, we have to maximize awareness and make sure they're practicing these hand washing, social distancing mantras that we're hearing so often. Do we have another question? Maximum number of passengers in a vehicle. The maximum number should be the smallest number of people possible, Bilal. We do not, when you're practicing social distancing, if you're in a sedan car, I mean, I would say one passenger. In most vehicles, I would say it's one passenger. Even then, we are almost certainly compromising the 2 meter or 6 feet of social distancing if we are having more than one passenger. It should be an absolute minimum. And then it comes to the question, well, if there are more than one passenger that needs to travel, do we consider sending 2 vehicles? Now, there's no hard and fast rule for this. I think we're all learning through experience as we develop in this extraordinary situation. But I think common sense and logic must be applied by the fleet manager, the dispatcher, or indeed the management of the operation. No simple answer. Any advice for motorbikes? Well, I guess on a motorbike, the chances of social distancing are greatly improved. But for specific advice for motorcycles, no, we do not have specific advice for them. There is the standard that they need motorcyclist protective equipment anyway, which includes gloves, helmet, high-vis jacket, and boots if possible. But very specifically in the context of this, of the corona, no, I think that the motorcyclists should just be very conscious of their social distancing when they get to any given destination or when they're leaving a destination. The problem there, I suppose, is that we talked in the vehicle about carrying a water supply to allow for the washing of hands and disinfectant. That would be more problematic, but I would suggest that even if the motorcyclist there very often has a small backpack, but has even a small spray of sanitizing liquid, whether it be diluted bleach or whatever, would be a useful addition. Well, I think this question here for the long distance, Shatil, the long distance, it's the same as the truck drivers. I think it's the same logic in a way. When the long distance truck driver, he is very often on his own or with a co-driver, and greatly has a better chance of social distancing. But it's still that point of when you arrive and when you depart a destination, are you clean? If he's entering that vehicle and he has been infected, it doesn't matter if it's a long journey or a short journey, it should be avoided. So I think the general rules apply to both long distance and short distance drivers. Yes, Martin. Good morning, Martin. What about AC? We have been advised that the AC should not be used and that windows should be left open to the extent possible. Yeah, I mean, in normal operations, we always recommend that for safety and security reasons that the vehicle window should be closed when the vehicle is moving. But I think, again, we're in very strange times and norms are being pushed out the window. The advice that we have received is that windows should be open to a degree possible, and that AC should not be used, and certainly not the recirculation function on air conditioning in a vehicle. What is PPE? Sorry, Kofi, sorry for not explaining in more detail. PPE is personal protection equipment. Personal protection equipment can vary, but the minimum personal protection equipment should be an appropriate face mask. It should be gloves. What we mean is that somebody can protect themselves from picking up that virus. So this could also include having water in the vehicle to wash hands. It could have wipes to clean the vehicle and so on. But PPE is the basic equipment that all drivers should be provided with to ensure that the opportunity for transmission is minimized. Now, I think that PPE can vary in context. As I mentioned a bit early on, it could be an entire suit with a full head covering, with rubber gloves, with rubber boots. I would say that perhaps only in very intensely infected areas is that extent necessary. But I think providing drivers with PPE, personal protection equipment, is vital not only to it has two functions, not only to actually physically protect them, but also to demonstrate to the drivers that the organization is cared, it takes care of their protection and wants to feel that they are protected. And I think it's a very good thing to do, to encourage drivers to use the PPE, to provide it to them, to provide training on how to use it, provide training on why they are using it, and commend them for using it. It convinces or demonstrates to drivers that their interests are being taken care of by the organization. Okay, so what we are doing is the Fleet Forum has put on a series of webinars. Actually, today's the first, but we've got a whole sequence of them. And if you go to the Fleet Forum website, as you can just see from the bottom of this screenshot, there is a list of the different webinars that are coming up. We're doing normally, each webinar is repeated, so it's twice in a single day. We would greatly recommend you checking out the website. We'd recommend that you register for those that that you think are of interest to you. We would encourage you to tell your colleagues and point out ones that perhaps your colleagues are not aware of this, invite them to participate in these. And I think it would be, as we're building these over time, so this list may well develop and expand over time, as I say. We're also putting together a collection of resources. Many of you are familiar with the Fleet Forum Knowledge Platform. The Fleet Forum has been approaching many of its member organizations and friends and associates, organizations that are friends of Fleet Forum, and asking them to provide the best guidance and advice that they have on on how to deal with these. And you can see that we have a specific section under COVID-19. There's a whole series of tools and documents. We are building these. These again will increase over time. We would also greatly, kindly request you, if you have some documents that we could use to add to this, please submit them. If you do submit them, please also indicate if Fleet Forum can post them directly on the knowledge platform, whether you would like to have them referenced to your particular organization, or if you specifically don't want references to your organization. Different organizations have different perception on each of those. And as you say, as we go into those resources in a little bit more detail, each of those links provides very specific information. You can see that some of those titles do not currently have hyperlinks. That is because we are still working on that documentation. It will be built. We're expanding this literally on a day-to-day basis. This collection of information is expanding daily. So please do feel free to A, review, look for information, B, contribute. If you have something that you think is lacking here or is a good piece of information that you are using, please submit it, and we would love to include it in the knowledge platform. As I said, this is a state of evolution. We're holding a number of these webinars. Please look at the website to see them and sign up to them. Please use the knowledge platform there. And if you have good information, please submit it to us to add to this catalogue of useful information. We greatly appreciate your participation. Please spread the word, but don't spread the virus, okay? So talk to your colleagues, encourage them to use these resources, come to our webinars, and we very much hope that you are all safe and well, and we are all working in extremely challenging times, and but stay connected with us, and we will do our best to share state-of-the-art information with you as this crisis evolves. Okay, everybody, thank you very much indeed for your participation. I see there's many. I see the list appearing here, and I can see many names that I know, and it's a pleasure to have you on board and to have so many people signing up. So thank you very much, and we very much hope that you will join further webinars that the Fleet Forum are putting on this subject. Thank you very much, everybody, and stay safe. Bye.